What's up, my wizards? It's Dev and Ziggy. We're from Mtg. We like a magic, in case you hadn't heard by now. And we got a good one in the chamber for you today, y'all. Cocked and loaded. Here's Smitten Shotgun. AKA Smitten Wesson. It's pretty good, right? Credit goes to patron Joe Seaverman for that one. Just the best possible pun imaginable for this deck. Congratulations, Joey. Now, just in case you hadn't seen this deck making the rounds recently, it's been doing just that. From article to article, video to video. A few different people have talked about this, and Takeshi Senu even brought a version of this deck to Mythic Championship 5, so you know it's the real deal. And maybe the best thing about it is that it's like my favorite archetype in our whole crazy game. This is a combo deck masquerading as an aggro deck. If you look through this list, you see that it plays 30 creatures, a bunch of 1 and 2 drops, and you're like, oh, well, this is an aggro deck. Not at all. This is actually an abusive combo deck based around Smitten Swordmaster and Lucky Clover. You see, sometimes in the relative late game, just one casting of the Curry Favor half of Smitten Swordmaster is going to do like 5 or 6 damage to your opponent. But if you do that while you have like 2 Lucky Clovers out, suddenly you're doing 15 or 18 damage to your opponent all at one time. And that's how this deck functions, more as a combo deck than an aggro deck. If there's one piece of advice that I want you to take into this deck if you start playing it, it's remember that you shouldn't run your creatures into combat unless you absolutely have to, unless it's 100% safe. Don't block with your creatures unless you absolutely have to. Take as much combat damage as is needed so long as you stay alive, because all we're really trying to do in this deck is build our board to such a point that a Smitten Swordmaster kills them outright. Now, of course, by all means, if you've got an opening in the first couple of turns, you can get some early damage in, then go ahead and do that. We're trying to count up to 20. Every little bit counts. But if it comes at the expense of losing a couple of creatures in combat just to do like 3 or 4 damage, then you might want to hold off on that. Because again, all we're trying to do in this deck is stack our board as much as we can so this combo does as much damage as possible. Now, pretty much the entire rest of the deck at this point is dedicated to finding these cards for the combo, or generating card advantage somehow so that we're more likely to find them, or just putting knights onto the battlefield. And there's a lot of crossover in those 3 categories, but there is one non-knight creature in the deck, and that's Edgewall Innkeeper. One of the only green cards in the deck, for that matter, but you just can't ignore a card advantage engine like the Innkeeper. I've tried to build this deck Orzhov and Rakdos and Mono Black, but they all pale in comparison to the Golgari version because Innkeeper really sends things over the edge of the wall. I mean, this is a turn 1 play, and that's exactly what a combo deck wants out of its card advantage engine, and it can get you a lot of card advantage over the course of a game. Yeah, we're playing 4 copies of Swordmaster, that much has been established, but we're playing a total of 16 adventure creatures in this deck, and there's going to be turns where we play 2 or 3 of them all at the same time, and that is a lot of card advantage. Play all 4 copies of this, no questions asked. Kind of like staying at the edge wall, I imagine. This dude does not look like the kind of dude to ask questions of those visiting his establishment. But anyway, let's move on to the other green card in the deck, and that's Once Upon a Time. This is it for green stuff, and we don't even have to have green mana to cast this as long as we do it, on our turn 1 or 2, or it's the first spell that we cast that game. Now, I will say, if this was just a regular creature deck, we'd play all 4 copies of this, but this is a combo deck. We're looking for, like, specific creatures. So, heck yeah, we'll play all 4 of this. And can I curse on my channel yet? It's been 5 years. Heck yeah is a little cringy. I can pump it up, right? But anyway, play the playset is all I'm saying. Now, the other day I put up Abzan King gameplay, and a bunch of people gently reminded me in the comments section that you want to wait until the last second to play Once Upon a Time. And they are absolutely right. Just so you know, if you want to be a good Magic player, wait until the last moment before you actually cast Once Upon a Time. Don't just do it on your opponent's end step if you don't have to, but I get lazy. I enjoy talking more than I enjoy actually zoning into the game that I'm currently playing, so that's just my excuse. But I will say in this deck, sometimes you'll want to play Once Upon a Time on your turn 1 before you play a land, and not necessarily at the last possible second, especially if you've already got stuff in your hand like Swordmaster or any other cards that you might look for, but you don't have a 1-drop on turn 1. Go ahead and play this before you drop a land so that you don't accidentally drop a swamp and then get Edgewall Innkeeper off of this. Or conversely, maybe you drop a forest and then you get Knight of the Ebon Legion off of Once Upon a Time. It doesn't feel good. Now, pretty much the rest of the deck is Knights at this point, but there is one more Silver Bullet non-creature card, but kind of a secret. A mausoleum secret, to be exact. I am really surprised that I'm like the only one that seems to be playing this card in the main deck. Even just the one copy. And I'm really thinking about boosting it up to 2. It's been that good. This card overperforms, and even though it can't search up an Edgewall Innkeeper or a Lucky Clover because it has to go get a black card, it can search up a Smitten Swordmaster. And anybody that's played this deck can tell you that there's going to be turn after turn after turn some of the time where you're looking for either a Smitten Swordmaster or an Order of Midnight to get a Smitten Swordmaster out of your graveyard. And this can go do that for you for just 2 mana at pretty much any point in the game past, the relative mid-game. If it's turn 5, you can probably go get a Smitten Swordmaster with this card. So I just don't know why more people are playing it. Maybe they've overlooked it or completely forgotten it existed, but the one copy of Mausoleum Secrets has been treating me real nice because it's effectively a 5th copy of Smitten Swordmaster. But, as I said a moment ago, the rest of the deck is knights at this point. I mean, we've got 26 knights in total in this thing, and again, a lot of them actually help create card advantage in some way, like Foulmire Knight, for instance, or Midnight Reaper. Both of these are great card advantage tools. If our opponent sweeps us, Reaper is there to help make sure that we draw a gang of cards to help, make up for the stuff we just lost. Foulmire Knight, especially if you have a Lucky Clover, can end up drawing you a bunch of cards, and there's been a bunch of times, actually, in testing, where you have like 2 Clovers out, you just draw 3 cards off of Foulmire Knight, and it's kind of disgusting. Plus, a 1-mana Knight to just throw into play and help build your board for an eventual Swordmaster. So keep that in mind. You got to have both of these cards. Even though Midnight Reaper is a little bit high up on the curve and I don't want to play too many 3-drops, you kind of have to play all 4 of these. Oh, and by the way, Foulmire Knight can just hold off like 2 or 3 big dudes all by itself some of the time. If you've ever played a sealed event, you know that a 1/1 Death Touch is actually a really annoying thing to try to get around. That's very much the case here too. Foulmire Knight actually provides a fair amount of defense on the ground for us. But aside from that, we've also got 4 copies of Murderous Rider in here. Not necessarily strictly card advantage, but at least a form of card advantage, where you can kill one of their things and put a creature of our own into play. And this is really nice to have against the Okos of the format or the big creatures like Questing Beast and beyond that we're all facing right now. It is very nice to have removal on a stick. That also counts as a knight, so play all 4 copies of this card too, and I shouldn't have to tell you that twice. There's also 4 Order of Midnight in here. I mentioned this card a second ago. This is actually one of the most important cards in the entire deck. Not only can this get Smitten Swordmasters out of your graveyard for you, and there's going to be some of the time where you block when the Smitten Swordmaster specifically to put it in the graveyard so that Order of Midnight can get it out next turn. But do keep in mind that if you have a Lucky Clover in play, suddenly you can get 2 or even 3 creatures out of your graveyard if you've got the requisite number of Clovers in play. But be very careful when doing that. Now, the reason I say be careful, and I ran into this a bunch when I first started playing this deck, is because it's actually fairly easy to fizzle Order of Midnight and have it go to the graveyard rather than go to exile if you choose the same creature twice. In other words, if you have, say, 2 Lucky Clovers out and only a couple of creatures in your graveyard, and the copy of the Raise Dead spell targets the same creature you originally targeted, well, it's not going to be there anymore once the original spell goes to resolve. That means Order of Midnight won't go into exile so you can cast it later. It just goes straight to your graveyard. This same thing applies to Murderous Rider, by the way, so be very, very careful. I'll say it again. But with the warning issued, I'll reiterate that this is easily one of the best cards in the deck and an amazing card advantage engine if we have even just like 1 Clover out, because there's going to be some of the time where you use an Order of Midnight's Raise Dead effect to get back another Order of Midnight from your graveyard. And then you can cast the Raise Dead one on that and get back more creatures from your graveyard. And again, if you have a Clover in play, you're just getting your entire graveyard, putting it back into your hand. So that's just insane at helping us, fight sweepers and spot removal and block effectively. I've already said I don't really want to block if I can possibly help in this deck, but a card like Order of Midnight lets us block and just get those creatures back from the graveyard. So just an unbelievable card. You want to draw it pretty much every turn, even on turns where you want to draw a Smitten Swordmaster. You'll take an Order of Midnight to get a Swordmaster back from the graveyard. So yeah, submit it for the approval of the Midnight Society. This definitely passes. We're also playing 4 Knight of the Ebon Legion for when we do want to get offensive. This is actually a great offensive or defensive creature for what that's worth. Just like Foulmire Knight and the fact that it has Death Touch can hold back whole teams some of the time. Just the threat of activation on this, the ability to go Death Touch, can hold back a creature or two as well. So even though this card makes the deck a little bit hungry for mana, a lot hungrier than I want it to be, it's still a card we absolutely have to play. Not only because it's a one-drop knight that helps us develop the board quickly for Smitten Swordmaster, but also just because it's like one of the best creatures in all of Standard. And even though the price tag is still relatively high, it has dropped some, so don't be a Knight of the Ebenezer Scrooge by the card. That is the worst pun. That's the worst pun in the video. Why can't I be as good as Joe Sieverman at coming up with puns? But to finish off the Knights in the deck, and the main deck in general, we're going to be looking at 2 copies of Black Lance, Paragon. This thing's crazy. But I'm not going to play all 4 copies of it like Takeshi did at Mythic Championship 5. The deck doesn't really want to play at instant speed, but that said, you will catch a bunch of people flat-footed. And this is really good at eating aggro creatures and gaining you some life back. It almost feels like a fog effect some of the time, but other times you're just going to play it at the end of your opponent's turn and then go and start swinging with it. That happens too. I really like the sort of, play this has against control as a relatively big-bodied but cheap creature, but also aggro as effectively a removal spell against ground creatures that gains you life at the same time. Something that we absolutely need. If we're going to not block some of the time and just take as much combat damage as we can before we die, then stuff like this really helps. We can play it, gain a little bit of life, and even though we lose Black Lance Paragon, we stay in the game for a little bit longer and take a creature out. Coupled with the life gain on Swordmaster, stuff like this really helps us stay in the game. Now, here's the lands. We're only playing 21, but the deck that was at Mythic Championship played 20. I'm adding one here because I think we need to. And the deck is really, really hungry, not only with Knight of the Ebon Legion activations, but sometimes you want to play a card out of your hand and a card, out of exile, an adventure creature or something. You're drawing cards with Edgewall Innkeeper, Midnight Reaper, so there's a lot you want to spend your mana on in this deck, and sometimes 21 doesn't even feel comfortable enough. I don't know how they manage with 20 lands, but 21's what I've gone with here, and the Castle Lockwings are especially all-stars. There's going to be a few turns with this deck where, again, you don't attack, you don't do anything besides cast a creature or play a land, and those are going to be the turns where Castle Lockwing really comes in handy, helps you find the pieces that you need. Now here's the sideboard right here, and there's a lot you can do with a Golgari sideboard, but I think that Noxious Grasp is 100% firm at 4 copies. I've said it before, and I'll say it again, this card could go in the main deck right now with all the Questing Beasts and Okos and Nissas and just all the green stuff, but there's actually a few white cards you might want to destroy too. It's just an unbelievable card that has so many valid targets in this format right now. But there's also 4 copies of Drill Bit in there, which is really easy to get in this deck, what with all of our 1-drops dealing almost guaranteed damage on turn 2, especially if we went first. It is not hard to get through early damage, and Drill Bit is going to wreck their entire plan, especially if they have a sweeper. We have got to get that out of their hand, and Drill Bit's just the best way of doing that. Assassin's Trophy is just catch-all removal that can take out problem permanent types or the odd creature when you need it to. Veil of Summer can protect any creatures that we want to protect for any given reason, or just keep our opponent off of counter spells and such. There's also another copy of Black Lance Paragon from when we come up against dedicated aggro decks. And finally, the Find Finality. That sounded weird coming out, but anyway, Find will sometimes just, against these control decks and decks with a lot of removal and sweepers, will help us get more Smitten Swordmasters or really any creatures out of our graveyard. And then Finality will sometimes function as a sweeper, but only very rarely. Really, I'm just playing this for the Find half. But here are your power rankings right here. A final score of 68, which is really, really good for what we're playing with here. Just looks like a janky combo deck, but it's actually really serviceable. There's a lot of different ways to generate card advantage and find the pieces that you need. And in the meantime, you just got a lot of pretty desirable creatures on the battlefield to either attack or block with if need be. Now, 68 seems high, but I mean, this deck is really high in consistency, again, because of all the card drawing elements and the fact that, like, if you want to play a creature every turn on curve, the deck does that pretty well too. I'd call that consistent, but it's also very resilient when it comes to things like, Order of Midnight or card drawing pieces like Edgewall Innkeeper and Midnight Reaper that fight sweepers, very resilient deck, but it's also really synergistic too. So it's just got like all my most highly valued categories are high numbers here, and I'm happy about that. But full disclosure, before we get out of here, I will say that I started building this deck about a week and a half ago or so, way before the standard bannings were ever even a thing. And it was just crushing. This deck was doing very, very well in ranked play on Arena. But ever since the bans have been announced, I have run up against far less Field of the Dead decks. Obviously, the deck is banned, or at least it will be at time of recording. It's not going to be banned for like another day on Arena, but everyone's more or less moved on from the card anyway and tried to come up with some new stuff. And in that meta, in this new meta, I run up against so much more removal, so many more sweepers than I was just a week ago. So I will say, just for the sake of being honest, you know, this deck has not done as well for me in the last week as it did the week prior. But that said, it's still been winning me a bunch of games, and it's just a freaking blast to play this stupid deck. You know, we've got a lot of really good cards. Again, it looks like a janky combo deck, but it comes out to like $250 on TCG Player because we've got Fable Passage, we've got the green-black Shockland, but we've got actual like good Magic cards that have good text printed on them too, that aren't just lands. We've got like Murderous Rider in there, Once Upon a Time, Assassin's Trophy. I mean, there are some high value cards driving up the price of this deck, but I mean, that's just, it makes it a much better deck that way. You know, I really wouldn't want to take out things like Assassin's Trophy from the sideboard or Once Upon a Time from the main deck. I just don't know that a budget version of this deck would be anywhere near as good. So I ended up on the deck that plays a bunch of, you know, $16 to $20 rares. But honestly, I think it's the only version of the deck that's truly viable at this point, and I wouldn't take it back from the world. I struggled, you know, with, do I want this deck to be budget, or do I just want to, you know, present the pumped up version? And in the end, especially with the way the format's trending in the past week, I really don't think the budget version has like any legs, but this one can still do some actual work for you. So if you want to try this thing out, link in the description to TCG Player, the very first link, as a matter of fact, where you can pick this thing up for the lowest price you're going to get it anywhere else on the entire internet. I mean, if you're looking to pick it up, you can't do better than TCG Player. They are the lowest prices, but I do hope you give this one a shot. This has been one of my favorite decks all season. It's just, again, I love combo aggro decks. That's why I loved the cat food combo so much, and this is kind of the next logical step if you're looking for another fun combo aggro deck. I will have gameplay out of this deck in the next day or two. You know, if you want to try before you buy, I can totally understand that if you want to hold off, but I will definitely have gameplay up of this. I'm going to be playing it for the rest of the season anyway. It's just a ridiculous deck, and there's a lot of times where you'll come back from the dregs of death. You know, you'll be at 2 or 3 and draw that Smitten Swordmaster, draw that Order of Midnight, and suddenly you just hit him for like 15 damage. Out of nowhere, win the game. This deck is super resilient, so long as it top decks the correct things. But it's just so much fun to play, and I haven't been this all smiles about a deck in a while, so I do hope you get a chance to try it out. And if nothing else, you'll see me play it in the next couple of days. But in the meantime, let me know how you'd build it down there in the comment section, or any tech I didn't get to in the video, any of that stuff. Because I know a few people have been trying this deck out, and there's no way I could get to every little piece of how you're supposed to play this deck, because there's a lot of little intricacies. But hopefully we'll see some of that on camera as I get some more games in with the deck. But in any case, let me know how you felt about it down there. Like the video if you got the time. Only takes a second. Subscribe if you're new. Hit the bell for the notifications, because subscribing is a 2-step process for some reason at this point. But also check out the link in the description to go over to Patreon, or just go to patreon.com/SBMTG to support content like this. $1 a month is all I ask of you, and that'll help you pick what content we do around here. Seriously, Patreon helps so freaking much. Thanks to all of my patrons that I currently have. Y'all are lifesavers. You have no idea how much better you make my life and how much better you make my content. Appreciate every single one of you. But in any case, I think actually done for this one. So I will catch you cats later. I'm Deb from the place. Thanks for watching, my wizards. Spread love and be kind. Are you okay, Ziggy? Yeah, you're just asleep. Yeah, there's your head. There's your meow. Yeah, he's your good buddy.